my name is Laura Kovacs, and I'm honored to be here this evening to introduce Laura Lippman and Duane Swierczynski. Duane Swierczynski is the author of more than 200 comic books, several crime thrillers, including Expiration Date and the award-winning Charlie Hardy series, and 6 nonfiction books about vice and crime, including The Perfect Drink for Every Occasion, The Big Book of Beer, and this year's A Stick-Up, The Big Bad Book of American Bank Robbery. His newest comic, Black Hood #1, debuted just a few days ago. Earlier in his career, he worked as an editor and writer for Details, Men's Health, and Philadelphia magazines, and he was the editor-in-chief of the Philadelphia City Paper. In Canary, a college student-turned-drug informant must outsmart the criminals and the cops who hold her life in the balance. Laura Lippman is the author of the Tess Monaghan mysteries and winner of nearly every Mystery Writers Award, including the Edgar, Anthony, Agatha, Nero Wolfe, Seamus, Gumshoe, Barry, Quill, and McCavity Awards. She was a reporter for 20 years and published 7 books about accidental PI Tess Monaghan before leaving daily journalism in 2001. She's also received wide critical acclaim for her standalone novels, including What the Dead Know, about which Janet Maslin's New York Times review raved. You read it once just to move breathlessly toward the finale. Then you revisit it to marvel at how well Mrs. Lippman pulled the wool over your eyes. The ways motherhood transforms women, for good and ill, are at the center of Tess's investigations in her 12th book in the series, Hush, Hush. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in first welcoming Duane Swierczynski to the stage.
Hey guys, thanks y'all for coming out here on a actually balmy night in Philadelphia. I want to read a bit from my book, Canary. It's about a college-age drug informant named Sari Holland. She's 17, kind of a square, a little bit of a nerd. Her first college party, she nurses a beer for like 3 hours. But one night, she actually promises a cute guy a ride downtown to get a book from a friend, which is actually a drug run. She has no idea. He has pills in his car and then goes for a cheesesteak run, as we all do after a drug run. And of course, as fate would have it, she's pulled over by a police officer, who is the second major character in the book, Benjamin F. Wilde, who's 32, African-American, and wants a big drug bust so bad he can taste it. He doesn't want to bust Sari necessarily. He wants the cute boy she was driving, who then can turn on the drug boss he works for. But Sari is sort of stubborn and doesn't want to give up the goods at all, and that's the sort of tension in the book. They look at me and say, no way, but I'm not a 17-year-old girl in college. So I read a piece from Wilde's point of view. So I can't really pull off that voice anymore. This is actually picks up, it's kind of midway through the book, and it picks up where Sari's been a CI for about a week, and she invites Wilde to lunch at the Armingo Diner in Port Richmond, which you may remember was closed, sadly, to have a conversation about the drug trade. And here's a bit of that conversation. Wilde pulls paper packets of fake sugar from the rectangular glass container and spreads them out on the diner tabletop, still not believing he's doing this. He's surprised she reached out to him. He gestures to the sugar. Okay, Sari, this is the product. Anna's girl tells him, hold on, then goes digging into her purse. She pulls out a Robin's Egg blue exam book and a black pen. What are you doing? Taking notes. Notes for what? It's how I learn. I write it down, it goes in my head, and stays there. I learned it in high school. Huh. Anna's girl is the real deal, that's for sure. He was surprised when she texted him an hour ago. He didn't recognize a number at first. For the past week, Wilde has been on her ass, not the other way around. Maybe the next week's worth of pressure is about to pay off. Who knows? But when he called back, Honor's girl said in this whispery voice, how can you tell someone's a drug dealer, like for sure? And there you go, Wilde thought, caving in. Well, he told her to meet at the Armingo Diner, which was their place, he supposed, in 1 hour. This time, she showed up hungry. Not that she orders real food. Instead, it's just a garden salad, olive oil vinaigrette, and weirdly, a bowl of oatmeal and honey. You don't want some real food, he says? This is real food, she counters. Willie orders a coffee and gets down to business, the business of drug dealing. Okay, so how do you find a drug dealer, she asks. They could be anyone. Huh, Willie says. Now you understand why they pay me the big bucks. That's not what I mean. I'm not so worried about the dealers so much as what dealers can do for me. The only way to bust them is up the ladder. The ladder, Sari asks. Willie gets the idea to illustrate the whole drug trade at this dining room table. Here's sugar, here's the product, he says. The product, she asks? You know, oxys, Percocet, heroin, whatever. He might be talking a bit too loud, he realizes. A couple of civilians' heads are turning now. Black guy, white girl, talking drugs, a diner table. Got it, she says, oblivious. Honors girl scribbles it down. God bless her. It's a complex network, Willie says. You don't have guys jumping off a boat somewhere and roaming the streets selling shit, he says, almost in a whisper. The product that passes through many, many hands before it ends up with your average street dealer. He glances at the table, then slides an ancient ketchup bottle next to the plastic sugar container. This ketchup, this is your drug lord, the guy in charge of everything. He gets product from right from the source, South America, Mexico, Afghanistan, wherever. But a lot of the stuff here in town comes from Mexico through California. Sari glances up, glances down, writes furiously. Willie can't help himself. He likes having an audience. He's feeling inspired. He grabs a sticky grape jelly tub from the small plastic rack of them. Takes an apricot jelly tub, too. What the hell? He loads the sugar on top of the jelly tubs. These are your international smugglers. Drug lord hires these guys to transport the product into the country. They're real good at it, too. Say it's Coke. These guys are sneaking 500 tons of this shit into the country every year. Willie slides the drug smuggling jelly tubs across the tabletop now, forward toward, what can he use? Mustard bottle. One of those fat, squat ones. Yeah, that was right on. This here, Sari, is your kingpin. He's in the U.S. overseeing shit on this end. Sari writes furiously. Willie positions the plastic salt and pepper shakers next to the mustard. Now here's next level down, domestic distributors. They take the shit from the kingpin, they process it, cut it, whatever, and send it on to the dealers. Sari looks up from her notes expectantly. Willie scans the table. What's left? Next to his coffee cup are 4 empty creamer tubs, paper tops all peeled back. Yeah, they'd work. He gathers them up and drops them in front of Honor's girl. Now these are your dealers. The guys out there slinging it to the customers. They're nobody special. They're the guys behind the counter at fucking McDonald's, expendable, replaceable. And to illustrate the point, Willie wipes his paw against the table, knocking creamer tubs across the table where they slam up against the Formica partition. Your boyfriend there, he's a creamer tub. I truly do not give a high holy fuck about him. You want the next level, she says, understanding. The salt and pepper shakers. Yeah, making cases against salt and pepper shaker motherfuckers is what gets me up in the morning. Even better if I could take down enough of them to get a mustard bottle, a big, fat, wide-mouthed one. That's my real goal. Honor's girl writes it all down, leaving Willie feeling like he needs to give a summary statement. All this right here on the table, what you're seeing in front of, this is a $750 billion game. That's billion with a B. And I'm a brother making 60 grand a year trying to throw a wrench into it. She nods, puts her pen down, takes a bite of her salad. Chews thoughtfully. A lot's going through her head right now, he can tell. What happens to the creamer tub once you use him? Willie smiles. Depends. But in this case, the creamer tub in question will be fine if he gives up his salt and pepper guy. You have my word on that. Sari chews more salad. Willie continues. Let me tell you what usually happens to creamer tubs. Either we catch them or they end up dead. I'm talking the vast majority, Sari. Doesn't work any other way except unless they cop a deal. Your boyfriend's white, right? Sari continues chewing, glancing down at her rabbit food. She's not ready to answer this one, not yet. I'll take that as a yes. So maybe he has slightly better chances, but he's also more likely to be dipping into his own product if he isn't already. White boys sure do love their pills. Soon you got judgment lapses all over the place. For instance, you get your innocent girlfriend and drive down to the salt and pepper shaker and leave her holding the bag. If he's doing that kind of shit, he's already circling the drain, you know what I mean? Sari continues chewing. Washes things down with a gulp of ice water. Which means, Sari, you're doing him a huge... Her cell phone goes off. A text or something. She digs it out of her bag. Willie tries to take a casual peek, but the glare from the screen makes it impossible. Who's that? Sari looks up. That's my dad. He's wondering if I'll be home for dinner. With all that salad you're wolfing down? Then it comes, a real smile from Honor's girl. Wildy's floored. When his CI smiles, she looks a completely different person. So, Wildy says, feeling emboldened, anything you want to tell me? The smile fades just as quickly as it had appeared. A look of worry creeps back in. Come on, honest girl. Worry. Help your boyfriend. We can help them together. The kid talks tonight, and I can do my end run in this dealer by tomorrow morning. I'll buy you all the salad you can eat. It's the right thing to do. You're smart, so come on. Finally, she speaks. Give me 48 hours, Sari says, surprising Wildy for the second time in one day.
That could not possibly have been your allotted amount of time. Hi, thank you very much for helping me. I know my voice sounds hoarse, and I might even have this fantastic coughing fit when I'm up here, but I'm actually fine. It just sounds really bad, so don't worry about it. And know that I'm getting a little better every day. I'm just at the end of this. So, about 6-7 years ago, I had the really bright idea to make my long-running PI character, Tess Monaghan, a mom. I had always wanted to do a Rear Window type story, and I thought it was really fun to make it a Rear Window story in which the character who can't move is a woman on bed rest for a difficult pregnancy. And she sees something through the window, it piques her imagination, she investigates, in keeping with Chekhov's dictum, if there's an antique bedpan in the first chapter, it will go off by the final chapter. And it was an enormous amount of fun to write. I wrote it as a serial novel for the New York Times Magazine, and they asked me to do an outline, which I don't do. And it was the most amazing experience. I got up every day knowing what I was going to write because I'd done this outline. You would think that, of course, this would then inform the rest of my writing life, but I've never done another outline. The thing is at the end of the story, she had a baby, and I didn't know what to do. Now, I became a parent myself about 2 years after Tess Monaghan did. And before I was a parent, I would get a little prickly when I would hear people say, you know, you'll never really understand being a parent until you are one. But I realized that the main reason I became prickly is because I don't believe in fencing off people's imaginations. I think novelists can and should write about people different from themselves. You know, I write about people older than myself. I write across class lines and race lines and gender lines. So I certainly felt I could write about being a parent. That said, did becoming a parent change the way I wrote about parents? Of course I did, because everything that happens to me changes what I do as a writer. So it's not a case of knowing better or, you know, that I was doing it wrong before, but I do it differently now. You know, being a parent changed my life because there's suddenly this other thing I have to think about every day. And now Tess was a mom, and I was working in the crime genre, and Duane and I will talk later about the fact that I am a very, very proud member of the crime genre. I am not someone who feels the need to lament the genre, and I don't see it as having any innate limitations. But it does have expectations that there's going to be risk and suspense. And at the risk of sounding sexist, which I don't think I am, I felt that people would react especially poorly to a woman with a small child putting herself in harm's way. I certainly felt that the readers I knew who had been reading the Tess Monaghan books would be disappointed if she did stupid and reckless things. Unfortunately, doing stupid and reckless things had kind of been her stock in trade, and that had to change. Every year I teach writing at a program in St. Petersburg, Florida at Edgar College. I've been doing it for a decade now. And it's really been one of the greatest experiences of my adult life. I've learned so much about writing from teaching it. And one of the things I found myself talking to my students about is sometimes your manuscript has a problem and you think no one else is going to notice. like maybe a really big plot hole. Or maybe you have these characters who are doing things that are completely antithetical to the way you set them up, and all of a sudden you're asking us to believe that they would act in a way that they would never act. And you try to write really beautifully, and you say to yourself, but my writing is so beautiful that no one will notice this. And they do notice, and you can't get away from it. When you have a problem, you have a problem. But sometimes the way around a problem is to run straight at it. And what I realized in the 6 years that I took off from writing Tess Monaghan novels, because I couldn't figure out how to write about her with a small child, that was the story. Make that the story. Tess is now the mother of a kid who's just turned 3, and she is working for one of the most notorious mothers that ever was, a wealthy woman who killed her infant child 10 years ago and was found not guilty by reason of postpartum psychosis, and has now come back to Baltimore determined to be reunited with her surviving children and to make a film calling attention to herself and her legal situation. And meanwhile, Tess has daily life to contend with. So I will read this short scene set in a grocery store called Eddie's on a Friday afternoon, and I think that's all you need to know. Oh, and that Tess's daughter is named Carla Scout, and the middle name is for the main character of To Kill a Mockingbird. The Tasmanian Devil Looney Tunes edition was spinning in the narrow sloped aisle that connected Eddie's of Roland Park's liquor department to the grocery store at large, spinning and screaming and demanding something in garbled guttural oaths that could not be understood. It was a fascinating display, something that Tess could have watched in awe if the Tasmanian Devil were not, in fact, Carla Scout Monaghan, who had just been told that she could not have a can of Pringles potato chips. Not now, not ever, per her father's instructions. The only chips on his approved list were Kettle, which were certified GMO-free. And those were for emergencies. He preferred for Carla Scout to eat homemade chips. Oh, is Whittle you having a bad day? A well-intentioned Roland Park matron lowered herself on creaky knees to Carla Scout's eye line. The child responded with a scream that should have shattered the nearby bottles of scotch and gin and tequila. Lovely, lovely tequila, Tess thought. Could she have a shot now if she bought the bottle? Would that be so wrong? She couldn't really blame Carla Scout for responding that way to baby talk. It set Tess's teeth on edge, too. The book said to ignore tantrums or remove the child promptly. They said other things, too, but Tess tended to forget what they were when she was in the situation. She was frozen, watching her toddler thrash it out in a high-traffic area, blocking anyone who wanted liquor, beer, wine, and snacks. And it was Friday at Eddie's. Everyone wanted liquor, beer, wine, and snacks, including Tess. TGIF? In her life, it was more like FMIF. Fuck me, it's Friday. Friday and Saturday were big work nights for her husband, requiring him to go on by 4, then stay until almost 3 a.m., which of course meant he needed to sleep until noon on Saturday and Sunday. Tess dreaded Friday nights. All she wanted to do was pick up some prepared dishes, curry chicken salad for her, mac and cheese for Carla Scout, a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, get home and survive the next 5 hours. Carla Scout had a slightly different agenda. What you should do, the matron began, is get my husband a vasectomy. We're saving up. Why did I call him my husband? Why am I putting on a front for some stranger? Well, because enough of her life was hanging out in public. Much of Carla Scout's rear end was hanging out in public, as her dress had bunched up, exposing the fact that she was wearing no underpants. On a rather cool day in March. How had that happened? Tess had a vague memory of picking up Carla Scout from the Friday babysitter who helped cover the gap between her and her husband's work schedules, a hurried visit to the potty where Carla Scout had asked Tess to give me some privacy. Silly Tess had assumed that she'd come out with her Dora the Explorer underpants on beneath her long smock dress. Not Carla Scout's usual style at all, but it had been cleaned this morning, matched with miniature suede boots bestowed on Carla Scout by her fashion-conscious grandmother. It had made for a plausible outfit 8 hours ago. But no, Dora the Explorer was apparently exploring the floor back at the babysitter's house. Was having a bare-butt child in Eddie's grounds for being reported to social services? Tess crouched down and said in what she hoped was a persuasively no-nonsense voice, "Carla Scout, I am going to count you down. And if you can't calm down, you'll be going into quiet time, right here, in the store. 1, 2, 3. The girl's wails rose, and Tess felt as if everyone in North Baltimore was staring at her. 4, 5, 6. Carla Scout, although several aisles from Emerald's signature spices, kicked it up a notch. 7, 8, 9. Tess did not want to say it. 10. At that, Tess picked up her writhing daughter and deposited her in a corner. Quiet time, right here in the store. It was this or leave, and she'd be damned if she was going to leave when she had everything she needed but the wine. And she was really damned if she was going to leave without the wine. She could feel herself flushing from embarrassment. She tried to tell herself she didn't care. Tess had always maintained that she didn't worry about what people thought of her. Maybe she was lying to herself, or maybe motherhood was just the ultimate test. Every day she was judged 12 times and almost always found wanting. But she weathered the stares and smug glances, and Carla Scout finally calmed down, and they returned to their shopping with just the occasional dramatic sniffle. Carla Scout's, not Tess's, although she was tempted too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you all know how this works. Please raise your hand with a question. We will get a microphone to you. Please wait for the microphone. Tonight is a little bit special because we do have prizes for the first 6 questioners.
Only from Duane.
Laura doesn't care enough to give prizes, but that's okay, though. No, I'm kidding.
Who would like to
Peeps.
start us off?
A little, placement product, yellow birds, you get it. Anyway, yeah.
And the second 6 people who don't ask questions get the prize of not getting Peeps.
Who would like the first package of Peeps?
Wow, no people ever's here at all.
I guess I win. I would like to talk to you both about representing your hometowns. So, Duane, you're often setting stories in Philly, and particularly this one, Laura in Baltimore. What kind of responsibility do you feel towards your city?
Getting it right. Being honest about it, actually. I don't know if this is true in Philadelphia. Baltimore has a bad nostalgia habit. And it's not always attractive. There's a tendency, I know I've told this story before, but it's worth retelling. Thurgood Marshall was born in Baltimore. And Baltimore was famously, the waitresses called people hun. And there was this guy who kept sneaking down to the welcome to Baltimore sign and painting a comma and then the word hun. And one day I was sitting in the newsroom and 2 of my colleagues are African American, were talking, and they said, if someone had asked Thurgood Marshall when he was alive how he felt about Baltimore, they would have gotten those warm, fuzzy stories. There were never any waitresses who called him hun. And it was really eye-opening for me to think about the ways in which Baltimore romanticizes only certain parts of its past and very conveniently looks past others. So I love it. I have a lot of affection for it, but I think you can love a place and render it with affection without being dishonest about it.
Absolutely. I first started out writing about Philadelphia. My first books were sort of a little more pulpy. I didn't mind having the Frankfurt L blow up on its tracks, and having weird conspiracies set in Philly and having strange, police sex clubs and corners and alleys. But now as I've gotten older, and I kind of feel the same kind of responsibility that you're talking about, sort of, telling the truth about your city, the things you love about it, as well as the things you hate. And actually, the things I hate about the city are more horrifying than police sex clubs and, explosions. It is sort of, racism and sort of an old way of doing things and, all these stuff. I think I kind of avoided because I thought it would be cartoonish and fun to avoid it. But now, the most recent books, I'm trying to look at, the more serious side, I think. And Canary grew out of my fear for my own kids, in the city. that, my daughter is 11, 6 years away from being a 17-year-old, 18-year-old college freshman. I thought, wow, what will she encounter in the city? And this is sort of, my theory is that if I write about it, it won't happen. So that's my plan anyway. But I do like treating the city with more realism than I used to.
Thank you very much. There's a question right here on the aisle.
Thank you. Could you talk about how you develop an initial idea into a plot for a new book?
Yeah. Yeah, Duane can talk about that. I think as a former reporter, it makes sense that I'm inspired by a lot of things that happen in real life, but I'm not inspired by the facts of the case per se. I'm more interested in the thematic opportunities that are presented by certain stories. And they tend to be old stories, like most people haven't heard of, because I'm not really into the idea that I want to trade in the currency of I'm writing the true inside dish of this famous crime that everybody's heard of. And so I start with the setup, and then I think about where it would end up, and then I spend 9 to 12 months cursing silently under my breath as I try to find the 80,000 words that come between those two things.
Yeah, for me it's similar. I kind of have the situation in my head, like, what if this happened, And I think who's the worst or best person to sort of throw into that situation? And the plot kind of grows out of their reaction to it, or, the forces of nature's reaction to the character. And it's funny, I go back and forth. It's funny hearing you say that you didn't outline except for the New York Times serial. So I've gone back and forth. I can't decide. I'm like plot bisexual. Like I go where I'll plot. For Canary, I plotted. I gave Josh, my editor, who's here, a 7,000 word outline, the whole thing, and it kind of stuck to it more or less, without some, there's some variations. But previous books, it was just more me winging it and kind of seeing where it would go, and had no idea where the ending even, and that's fun too. I can't decide. It's kind of sad.
I think plotting is not. I think it's something that if you want to write, a lot of people find it a little bit intimidating. I certainly did. I think it's part of the reason I started with crime fiction, because I saw that I would have to figure out how to plot, and I knew I didn't know how to do it. And but then I decided I really, really like it. I like plot. I think again, that's one of those things where I see a lot of students who are trying to write around it. Like, maybe if I'm just such a good writer, you won't actually notice. Maybe if I'm Raymond Chandler, you won't notice that nobody knows who killed the chauffeur.
Right. Are those 8 or 9 months for you? Are they mostly, is it thinking and plotting in your head, or is it actively writing and going down dark alleys and blind spots?
It's a lot of writing. I don't really feel like I'm working if I'm not writing.
Okay. Yeah.
I try to count thinking as writing, but it's hard. It's like a series of wind sprints or ladders, if you know that. Like, I'll like go really fast and maybe like get to 30,000 words, and then I just can't. I have to go back to the beginning, and the next go through I might get up to like 50, 60,000 words, and I go back to the beginning.
Oh, wow. All
and
the
then
way through.
I used to try to go all the way through every time and do 3 to 4 drafts.
Yeah.
But now it's sort of this kind of constant, how far can I go? I've hit the wall, go back to the beginning, informed by all the stuff I found out. And the fact that I play so much with time really makes stuff crazy, because I write a lot of stuff in chronological order and then reorder it.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
Yeah.
So I go back a few pages and rewrite and going forward, almost like 1 step back, 2 steps forward kind of thing. The beginning, that sounds crazy, or crazy hard to like really go through all again. Not saying you're crazy. I'm just, it's daunting.
But that means that like the first third of the book has been drafted. Like almost 5 or 6 times by the time you get to the end of the book, and it's like the hard part is to knuckle down and give the end of the book as much attention as the beginning ended up getting.
Absolutely.
The first question, follow up on the first question, because you guys both, you write about Baltimore, and you write about Philadelphia, and I think for a long time there's been this kind of this regional knock that gets applied to writers who I guess aren't writing about New York or LA, and I think you both have escaped that, and I'm just wondering if you have any insights as to why, if you think things are changing, or if there's something about your writing and your careers that have allowed you to avoid that.
I know. For me, at least, I try to hit odd corners of the city that places people don't usually see on, like, in tourists, in tours and things on TV. I mean, I won't worry about the Liberty Bell. God help me. I did have a cheesesteak reference in Canary. I'm sorry. That was more of a joke on myself. But yeah, I try to find the things that are underreported. I grew up in a not so great neighborhood, and I find myself always telling stories there because they're undertold or underreported. Much like a journalist who kind of want to go to the neighborhoods that aren't getting the attention they deserve. That's just my take or theory.
It's going to kill me to say this. So I started publishing in 1997, and the show Homicide had just gone off of NBC, and it actually kind of primed the pump for this idea of Baltimore as a place of crime stories. And then this other show came along called The Wire. And the idea of Baltimore as a setting for crime novels is something, especially overseas, especially in the UK, it just makes sense to people. They think that's what it is. So maybe that's part of it. That whole thing about regional writing is so puzzling to me. I was just rereading one of my all-time favorite Laurie McMurtry novels, which is called All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers. And it's a University Press edition. And it has this afterword by a very well-meaning professor who says, of course, the regional novel is a lesser novel. And I'm kind of like, huh? Like, I don't get the idea that novels that have really strong senses of place have somehow pulled their punches or that they're immature. I love the setting of Scott Turo's novels, even though it's this fictionalized Chicago. I read for place. I have a hard time reading novels that are set in some kind of vague Chicago. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for me. So I don't get it. But yeah, I mean, what I think is really funny is that, in the New York and LA novels are considered somehow cultural touchstones. Right. In a way. Like, I resent the fact that I had to grow up as like this little kid in Baltimore knowing all those streets in Los Angeles because of the detective shows. Like, I know your streets. Why don't you know my streets?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, the place is big for me, too. I have a hard time reading stories without place. I mean, I love Ed McBain. The 86th Precinct stories drove me nuts. It's like a fake New York. I kept translating in my brain. Okay, what does that mean? Is that Bronx or Brooklyn? It drove me crazy. I kind of want a real place, real corners to sort of investigate in the book. So
I mean, to me, place is like almost one vital corner of it.
Yeah.
And without place, I mean, obviously there's some very successful novels that aren't strong in place, although I'm not thinking of one off the top of my head.
No.
I guess a big part of, I guess all the locations in Lolita are fictional, but they still feel really real. Mm-hmm. Like the initial suburb where the Hayes live, and then the little college town where they set up for a while.
Next question right here on the aisle.
I wonder if each of you could just talk briefly about how you got started writing, and I'd be curious particularly about Duane, where he went to high school in Philly.
What was the last part? So the last part was about...
What about high school in Philly?
Where in high school in Philly?
I said it with the Philadelphia accent, so no vowel.
Actually, I went every school I've gone to with college has actually closed now. So it's I went to North Catholic High School in the lower Northeast, and they closed a few years ago, and my grade school closed. So yeah, I'm a former Catholic schoolboy who is my whole career is rebelling against that, I think, and writing weird stuff. As far as how I started out actually. When I was in high school. Speaking of North, I wrote horror stories in my math class because I was so bored in math and science, and I would pass these grisly stories to my friends to read to amuse them. And I kind of wanted to be I knew I wanted to be like a Stephen King or a Clive Barker, a fiction writer, but I knew enough to know that I couldn't do it for a living, at 18 certainly. So I decided to pursue journalism, thinking that journalism is a great way to sort of learn how to be a better writer, make some money, not much, and still write on the side. And it kind of was my plan. It kind of worked out eventually. It was I grew to love journalism, and that became my career. Magazine journalism for about 13, 14 years. But I still always had that fiction bug, and kind of long story short, I wrote a novel, and it didn't sell for 5 years. It was a drawer novel. But I kept writing. I kept going. I learned that the one key, if there's any key to writing fiction, is that you should finish what you start. I had a lot of sort of half chapters or a few chapters of a abandoned novel. The one time I actually finished a novel, I kind of realized, wow, not that I know how to write novels, but I know how to write a novel now. Like I know how to actually complete a book-shaped mass. And that's just push on until the end comes. You can always revise it. You know, that's going to be a long time to learn. And once I learned that, it got a little easier. I had the confidence that, okay, I can actually start a book, and eventually it'll finish. It may be horrible, but I can actually, you know, at least work with it. So that's my weird origin story, I guess.
Yeah, I went to work at a newspaper too because I was the daughter of a newspaper man, and I knew you could make a living working in a newspaper. I didn't know anyone who made a living as a novelist, but it's what I wanted to be. And I was sort of writing these little stories on the side, weren't very good. And I was working in Texas at the San Antonio paper, and one of my colleagues profiled a writer who then was not particularly well known, and if you had said her name, most people would have said that she'd written a children's book. And she's giving a workshop up in Austin. Austin is 80 miles from San Antonio. Back then, you could drive it reliably in an hour and 15 minutes. Maybe not at the speed limit, but. And I just said, I'm going to go take her class. And that was Sandra Cisneros, who at the time had basically published House on Mongo Street and Web Book of Poetry. And she was a really early mentor. And she really believed in me. What happened next was in some ways more interesting, which is she left for a university gig, and a woman who took over the program, took over the workshop, thought I was a piece of crap. And this was actually really helpful in that it's great to have people who really believe in you, but it's also an interesting rite of passage to have this person who just thinks you're horrible and who challenges you and who you sort of have to like dig down and find on your own that, I mean, and I had that, and I had no shortage of people at the Baltimore Sun who were willing to fill that role for me. That was interesting. And, you know, so as that, I got really lucky in that I went to a party. And why did I go to the party? The party was thrown by this guy who now is like a personage, Jacob Weisberg. But we went to summer camp together. I taught his little brother how to swim. He threw a party. I went to the party. I met a woman who was like chatting me up, and she said, "Did you ever think about writing erotica?" Like, what kind of party is this? I just drove down from Baltimore. You D.C. people are crazy. But she had a contract from HarperCollins. It was supposed to be kind of high end. She said, "You can use a pseudonym. I need it by July 1st, and I'm paying $1,500. This is in 1992. I still don't get $1,500 for a short story very often. And it was kind of like, I get those terms. I understand that. There's a deadline. There's a check. I know how to do that. I know how to write like that. And when I turned in the story, it was accepted. The woman I'd met was someone who was actually had a long history in mystery publishing, Michelle Slung. She discovered Marcia Muller in a slush pile. She'd worked for Otto Penzler. And she said to me, "I think you can write a novel. And when you do, I will give you an utterly ruthless opinion about it." And she followed through on that promise and helped me find my first agent. And there was just a lot of luck in there, which I acknowledge. But I always tell people, it's because I talk to strangers at parties. It's very
Who
good
asked about
quality.
erotica?
Yeah,
So
but
is that story under your own name out there somewhere? Or is it
the first story is not under my own name, but there is a sequel.
All right.
There's a sequel that's under the name L.M. Lippman, and my parents didn't know for years, like years. I mean, this is 1992, and I think I finally started telling this story like 10 years, 15 years later, and it was in the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, which is my family's original hometown. And I remember the day the story ran, like my dad called and I'm like, "Hey, how you doing?" He goes, "Oh, it's just great to be the pornographer's father."
Was it R-rated, NC-17? I'm just curious.
The first one's actually pretty out there.
Wow,
it was
wow.
it was someone else's real life story that I stole.
Wow.
Yeah, it was about a threesome. So.
Pretty cool. Wow. Oh, we have peeps to give out. Sorry, that was a great question for the peeps. Yes.
One more question on the right back there.
Hi, thanks. Kind of based on what you just finished up with the real life person, I was wondering how much imagination do you use and how much do you base on real people and experiences? And I was thinking something like the drug dealing.
Oh, my lawyers tell me to tell you that it's based on nobody in particular at all. There's no basis in reality. No, actually, for me, it's actually if I have a secret to characters, it's sort of I use GMOs. You know what GMOs are? You know, genetically modified organisms. I take a character and insert some of my own DNA into them, which is like a Frankenstein creation. Even like, you know, Sari Holland, a 17-year-old college student, is part me. Because, you know, believe it or not, you're going to say, no way, Duane, but back in college, freshman year, I was kind of a dork. You know, I was a little shy and awkward. I know, it's stunning. I may have nursed those first beers, you know, for a while, unsure of myself. I may have done things for friends I shouldn't have. I may have sold meth for, no, I didn't do that. No, but you know what I mean? There's enough of me in her that I can see it, you know? Even the drug dealers, they all have motivations, they all have wants and needs, you know? And I love when writers, you know, can crawl in the minds of the most horrible people, because you should never have an entirely black hat, you know? There's no pure villain. They always have a motivation, always have, you know, a bit of humanity somewhere. It makes them interesting, I think. So I'm always putting myself, or sort of my worldview in some degree, in these new characters. And as far as basing on friends, I almost never do that. Do I, Ed Pettit? Just kidding.
You know, it's really, like, I understand the question, and as a reader myself, I'm often driven by that question of what's real, what's real, what's real. One of my longtime favorite novelists, although I've cooled on him a little bit, is Philip Roth. And he wrote this book called The Facts that purports to be the straightforward memoir of certain selections of his life. And somehow when you get to the end of it, you feel like you know less about him, which I think was sort of the point. I think he was tired of being asked about the way real life and his fiction. Obviously, I'm inspired by real life events. And, you know, there are people in my books that are inspired by real life people. Not so much Hush Hush, but the book I published last year was based on like this famous Baltimore legend about this bookie who just disappeared in the middle of the night, was never seen again, and left behind his wife, his girlfriend, and his 3 daughters. And yet it wasn't him. So I don't know, it's like one of these weird things that I can never come up with the really satisfying answer to. But I would say in the end, it's kind of like 95, 99% all out of my own pointy head. Mm-hmm. You know, it feels like it's a true act of imagination.
Absolutely.
It would be so much more fun if it weren't.
Next question. Right here in the front row, please.
I wanted to jump off 2 other questions that were asked, and I guess both are craft questions. The first is for you, Laura. You talked about, you know, writing ahead and then having to scrap what you've done, and you could go however many pages or however many words. And I agree with Duane. That's a crazy amount of words that you're going ahead before you write. My question is, like, as a writer, how do you develop the meter to know when to give up and to go back? Like, obviously, that meter has been honed and has become more subtle with every book, but when you're going and you know you're wrong, rather than to stick with something and try to write it out, how do you decide?
The story gets stuck. The story can't move forward. It's like the characters are sort of just standing there looking at me like, what do we do now? Like, I don't know, don't you know? No. I'm like, let me go back to the beginning and see if I can figure this out. I mean, this actually started years ago with a test book called No Good Deeds, where I think I wrote 80% of it 3 times. I needed everyone to go to Delaware, and they just wouldn't go to Delaware. And it was because the reasons for people to make this trip and to be in this place were not in the text. And so I had to keep going back through. And so when the characters get stuck, it's like, okay, something's missing. I haven't provided them with something, and they've just hit a wall. And let me go back and see what's missing. And it's sort of usually in there in what I've written. I just haven't pulled it out enough. And recently I did something that I think I've almost never done, which is I started rewriting based on research. I had written, you know, like half of this book, and I sat down with a real attorney to talk about sort of how a trial progresses. And, you know, found out it wasn't so much I'd made mistakes, but I'd missed some really profound opportunities. And I saw, like, oh, I need that scene. And so I, like, okay, fine. Back to the beginning, start over.
Wow.
And then I guess my second question is, Duane, you touched upon sort of writing villains or whether they're not villains. I wonder for both of you, how do you I think of them as antagonists. It's better than to, like, obviously for books where people are doing bad things, but they may not necessarily be bad people. Yeah. How do you write? How do you humanize your antagonists? And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Wildy, you know, who is both a good man but very much an antagonist in this story. But the question for both of you.
Oh, true. Actually, Wildy, I don't see him as a villain at all. He's a good guy. And that's the fun of this book was having a good girl and a good cop collide. And if they get both what they want, they can't both get what they want, you know, without trouble. So for him, it's just more about his career and kind of I kind of delved into his history, his family history. You learn he's actually the grandson of a cop, the great grandson of a cop. His father's kind of a screw up. So he's trying to redeem his family legacy by actually being the best cop he can. He's always looked upon as sort of you know, slow, maybe a little slow-witted. He's kind of a big guy, not fast. So he has a lot of things against him. And to him, redeeming is, you know, if he can make this big bust, it's his white whale. He's Ahab, and that's his whale. He wants to bust, you know, the drug dealer. So I think we all understand, you know, that kind of need to sort of prove yourself in terms of your family, in terms of your career. You know, that's kind of universal. You want to make your bones, even though people may see you in a certain way. So that's, you know, I think I was trying to, you know, stack the deck that way and make people realize, oh, he actually isn't being mean to this poor girl. You know, he's trying to actually do his job. And, you know, you kind of root for both, I think. If I did my job right, you root for both.
Was he black from the start?
He was. You know, I kind of realized that a lot of my books, despite being set in Philadelphia, were very white books, you know, and that's just, it's who you know, I was born white, you know, and a Polish Italian guy. And my, you know, point of view tends to be from a white, you know, usually Polish guy. I thought that's a dead end. You know, why not talk about the city as it is? You know, and I kind of do that more and more as I go along. I kind of want to. I was afraid to write about, you know, an African American character, just lacking the point of view. Even though I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood, and you know, all that liberal nonsense you say to yourself. But you know, I kind of wanted to do it for real, and I kind of again thought about his situation where he grew up and his family, and you know, we're more alike than different in that way. So yeah, it was always that by intention, design. Yeah.
I mean, most people don't experience themselves as villains. Maybe really extreme sociopaths who don't interest me very much. Most people who even do horrible things have somehow persuaded themselves that they have a reason to behave as they do. One of the worst serial killers of all time, he was named Arthur Good. He would kidnap boys, rape them, and kill them. John Waters went down to interview him when he was on death row in Florida. And he said, well, you know, I didn't want to kill them, but I had to because society felt that, you know, my love was wrong, which of course it was too. But, you know, he was there still defending his actions, even as he was headed to the electric chair.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Peep, and I'll let you know.
There's one more question right here in the second row.
Just got in for the peeps. Thought I was not going to get peeps.
Here, avoid the question. Here, just take your peeps. God damn it. Oops, sorry.
Oh.
Thank you. I'd already, you know, taken his peeps.
Sorry.
I was being a peep bully.
I'm sorry
Thank
for people
you.
sitting next to Ed. Sorry about that.
Recently, you alluded to this earlier. Recently, Richard Price, who's going to be here in a couple weeks, and I think another author had kind of disparaged, perhaps, crime writing, and it's the kind of genre that these famous writers write down to. And I'd just love to hear your comments on that.
Red flag.
There you go.
I set myself up for that. Okay, so it pisses me off. Here's the problem I have, and I had it also not even just with writers who, you know, are like, oh my God, I seem to have written a crime novel. Please don't hold it against me. Even the piece that was in the New York Times Book Review about, you know, I can't say his name. Simenon.
Oh yeah.
Even that, it kept having all these weird definitions of what a thriller was and what a traditional reader of thrillers wanted. And first of all, I know a lot of people who read crime novels, and it's very hard to generalize about them. I happened just to read Tom Nolan's biography of Kenneth Millar, Ross MacDonald. Eudora Welty was one of Kenneth Millar's biggest fans. Margaret Millar had Evelyn Waugh and Truman Capote as her fans. But the thing that kind of gets me is this idea that genre is defined as being something that must always be lesser. And I think the confusion starts, you go back to Chandler, The Simple Art of Murder, and he says early in the essay that the mediocre crime novel is published all the time, and you've probably never read, but the mediocre literary novel is not. Maybe back in the 40s, I've read my share of mediocre literary novels. But it's true that the genre novel can be executed on a level of competence that is not art, that is actually still pretty satisfying. Mm-hmm. And that is mistaken for being its upper limit. And its upper limit, there is no limit. Nick Hornby, writing about Mystic River, said it seemed to him that if you could do everything that a literary novel does and have a crime plot in it, you've pretty much got angels dancing on the head of a pin. And I agree with that. I mean, by the way, I'm always really careful. I'm not saying my work does this. I would never be the person who's like, oh my gosh, I'm just so fantastic. I'm transcending the genre. And I come back to, and I've actually talked to some poets about this, you never hear anybody say, yeah, well, you know, the Sestina, there are rules, so therefore it's a limited form. And so the idea that, yes, there are expectations in a crime novel. There are expectations for any novel, I would think. It just makes me a little bit crazy because I keep seeing this pronouncement of its innate limits. And the limits are not on the genre, they're on the people who attempt it.
Yeah. I mean, someday for an experiment, I actually want to write a novel about middle-aged characters with no plot whatsoever, and a car as a metaphor for their sex lives for 400 pages. No, I actually seriously wonder where the boundaries are. Where do you edge out of Genreville and creep in that good neighborhood of literary town? Is there, what is it, you know?
A lot of people think it's, you find people who don't read genre think that genre fiction, especially crime fiction, which I know best, is excessively tidy. And you see it happens time and time again. It's happened with some people who really botched it and some people who are more well-intentioned. But you can almost see the literary writers saying, I know, I shall write a crime novel in which not all the questions are answered. Right. And you could like throw a dozen at them. They just don't know. But their will to like name the names of the good guys. Then you have someone like Kate Atkinson who likes the genre, admires the genre, and then comes along and does something like the Jackson Brodie books, which really do feel original and fresh. And you know, that's what you want when a literary writer comes into the crime genre, is someone who loves it that much but does it that well and that distinctly. And so, you know, I just don't get it. I just don't. It's like...
Yeah, and how do you judge good writing? I always love Stephen King's definition of good writing. It basically said it's telepathy. If he can see something in his head and transmit it to you through symbols on a page, that's good writing. I mean, it can be you're sharper the image in your head that matches his image. You know, that's great writing. I mean, my goal is to actually see what's going on, for you guys to see what's in my head. God help you. And you know, and hopefully I have the imagination to take you somewhere you've never been before. That's why I read writers. I read writers to be taking places that I wouldn't go on my own, think thoughts I couldn't have on my own. Show me something new and crazy and wild. And I'm not looking for, you know, sentence construction. Take me there. I want to, you know, have those words wash over me and forget I'm reading and really just be part of that. Elmer Leonard, it's transparent, his genius. You know, it's sort of like, you know, that kind of thing.
I mean, and I don't know. I mean, I can make an argument for the difficult novel, for the novel where you do slow down for the style and the prose. I'm never going to write that kind of novel. But Megan Abbott just sent me an anecdote about Faulkner in Oxford, Mississippi, and a friend said to him, like, why do you read all these drugstore mysteries? And Faulkner said, if you think about it, everything we write is a mystery.
Nice.
It's a perfect place to end. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us upstairs for a book signing and join me in thanking our authors tonight.
Thank you. Excellent. Keep laughing. Anybody, don't be shy. All right.